In 1943, a small group of German industrialists made a choice that would echo across the next 80 years. While bombs rained over cities and millions struggled to survive, they were quietly turning wartime chaos into unimaginable wealth, wealth that still controls Germany today. BMW, Volkswagen, Hugo Boss. You know these names, but you don't know this. Their fortunes were built on secrets the world has tried to forget. Millions of dollars, hidden strategies, and connections that survived the fall of a regime, all preserved, protected, and transformed into modern empires. In this video, we'll uncover the shocking origins of Germany's old money, expose the hidden paths those fortunes took after the war, and reveal how families who should have vanished are still quietly running the show. What you think you know about these brands is just the surface. The truth is far darker and far more powerful. And it all begins with one small decision in the middle of the war. Germany, early 1940s. Factories weren't just humming. They were quietly writing the future of wealth in a way the world would barely notice. While cities faced chaos and shortages, a handful of industrial families were making decisions that would shape generations. They weren't just running companies, they were crafting dynasties. The Quandt family, for instance, had stakes in factories that produced engines and vehicles, not for everyday use, but for highly prioritized government projects. Every order they accepted, every plant they expanded, was not just fulfilling a contract. It was building a financial fortress that would survive the upheaval of war. BMW's factories, officially producing aircraft engines, became powerhouses of innovation, efficiency, and profit. The machines that left these halls were destined to dominate the skies, but the quiet winners were those managing the ledgers, not the pilots. Volkswagen, often remembered as the people's car, hides a story few know. Early production was largely fueled by government partnerships, with strict oversight dictating how factories operated. It wasn't mass consumer demand that drove early growth. It was strategic positioning within wartime structures, securing resources and labor in ways that would later make post-war expansion effortless. Even companies like Hugo Boss, today celebrated for fashion, were quietly shaping brand power decades before their modern reinvention. Their early operations involved contracts that guaranteed both visibility and profit under the complex wartime economy. Every uniform stitched, every design produced wasn't just a garment, it was a step toward establishing a name that could be transformed into an international empire in peacetime. Little known but striking, the Porsche Piëch family was experimenting with automotive designs that would only become famous decades later. Their wartime projects were often sidelined from public knowledge, yet they were quietly perfecting technologies, building influence, and laying financial foundations that would carry their wealth far beyond the immediate chaos. Through these moves, a pattern emerges. While the world focused on survival, these families concentrated wealth, built networks, and preserved influence. The bombed-out cities, the ration lines, the uncertainty, none of it touched the hidden financial engines quietly gathering momentum. And this was only the first chapter. What came next? The transformation of wartime assets into untouchable modern empires is a story so calculated, so precise, it almost reads like fiction. And the rest of the world still barely knows it exists. The war ended in 1945, but the story of wealth was far from over. While much of Germany lay in ruins, a few families had already positioned themselves to survive the upheaval. Buildings could be flattened, governments could collapse, but money, if managed carefully, was nearly indestructible. Here's where the strategy becomes almost invisible to the public eye. Many industrialists quietly transferred assets into safe holdings, restructuring companies under new names, shifting ownership through legal loopholes, and taking advantage of post-war policies designed to stabilize the country. Allied authorities were focused on rebuilding a shattered nation, and in that chaos, fortunes that should have vanished instead found ways to endure. Take the Quandt family, whose stakes in industrial enterprises remained largely intact. By the late 1940s, they had already moved to reclaim control over key factories, modernize production, and diversify investments, creating what would become BMW's powerhouse empire in the decades ahead. Meanwhile, the Porsche Piëch family quietly consolidated patents and engineering expertise, setting the stage for one of the most influential automotive dynasties the world would see. Volkswagen, once a government-backed project, was privatized in stages, but not without careful maneuvering by insiders who ensured control remained in the hands of those who had understood the rules of wartime wealth accumulation. And Hugo Boss, now a global fashion name, leveraged the post-war economy to reinvent its image, turning a shadowed history into a platform for legitimacy, branding, and international expansion. Even more astonishing, many of these families cultivated networks in banking, media, and politics, giving them indirect control over the new economy. They weren't just hiding wealth, they were embedding it, turning wartime advantage into generational security. The quiet rebuilding, the careful transfer of ownership, the networks woven behind the scenes. This is the reason these fortunes didn't just survive, they thrived. But survival was only the first step. What came next would transform hidden wartime fortunes into untouchable modern empires. And the methods they used were more audacious than anyone could imagine. Today, BMW, Volkswagen, and Hugo Boss are household names. Sleek cars, luxury suits, global recognition. But behind the polished logos and glossy marketing campaigns lies a history that few know, and even fewer talk about. BMW, for instance, is celebrated for engineering and innovation, but its post-war rise wasn't just about technology or design. It was about continuity. The families who had steered its wartime operations quietly reclaimed leadership, investing in new factories and pioneering technologies that would define the automotive world for decades. They weren't just rebuilding a company, they were protecting a dynasty. Volkswagen's story is even more layered. While the people's car narrative paints a picture of accessibility and modern German ingenuity, the reality is more intricate. After privatization, insider families ensured control through strategic holdings, mergers, and cross-investments with other industrial giants. The brand we recognize today isn't merely a car manufacturer. It's a carefully curated symbol of wealth, stability, and influence that has its roots in wartime strategy. Hugo Boss, now synonymous with fashion and prestige, underwent a transformation that most of the public never notices. In the 1950s and 60s, the company consciously reshaped its image, leveraging post-war economic growth and international markets to turn a shadowed past into a platform for legitimacy. What was once a contract-based operation producing government uniforms became a global fashion powerhouse. Every expansion, every marketing campaign, every sponsorship was meticulously planned to cement authority in the commercial world while erasing inconvenient history. Even more fascinating is how these families didn't just invest in their own companies. They quietly acquired stakes in banking, media, and infrastructure. BMW's leaders diversified their influence. Volkswagen insiders maintained stakes in allied industries, and Hugo Boss cultivated networks that amplified their reach far beyond retail. By embedding their influence across the economy, they ensured their names and their fortunes would endure in ways that textbooks never mention. And yet, the most startling part is what happens behind closed doors. These networks, these investments, these strategies, they aren't just historical artifacts. They're active, deliberate, and still shaping Europe's economic landscape today. But the story gets even more complex, because controlling companies and branding is only part of the picture. There's another layer, the hidden influence, the silent power structures, the families who operate entirely out of public view, and their methods are far more audacious than anything we've seen so far. While the world celebrated post-war recovery, a quieter revolution was taking place behind the scenes. The same families who had navigated wartime fortunes were now weaving influence into every corner of the new Germany. Their wealth wasn't just financial, it was structural, embedded in the arteries of power. The Quants, Porsche Piech, and other industrial dynasties didn't need headlines or public accolades. They operated in the shadows, cultivating connections with banks, regional governments, and trade organizations. Through discrete investments, they influenced policy, shaped industrial strategy, and even guided the direction of technological innovation. The companies they controlled weren't just profitable. They were levers of influence, capable of steering entire sectors. Media control was another quiet strategy. By holding stakes in publishing houses and news outlets, these families could shape public perception subtly, ensuring that inconvenient truths faded while their successes were celebrated. Philanthropy became a tool as well, not just giving, but crafting narratives, legitimizing wealth, and creating a public image of benevolent leadership. And here's the remarkable part. All of this was done without fanfare. No scandal, no tabloids, no flashy displays of wealth. This wasn't just discretion, it was deliberate, a long-term strategy of silent dominance. Their influence became invisible by design, so that when outsiders looked at post-war Germany, they saw progress, reconstruction, and democracy. But the hidden currents of power remained intact, guided by the very same families who had profited decades earlier. Even more astonishing is how these networks intersected. Industrialists weren't acting alone. They collaborated with financiers, engineers, and politicians in ways that left little trace in public records. Decisions that shaped the German economy, the direction of innovation, and even the structure of European trade agreements often passed through their hands first. But controlling behind the curtain was only part of the picture. Because the real genius of these dynasties lies not just in influence, they also perfected the art of myth-making. They took past advantage, erased inconvenient histories, and replaced them with carefully curated images of legacy, culture, and prestige. And what came next, the way they rewrote public perception and solidified untouchable empires, was even more audacious. Most history books stop at 1945, painting a neat picture. Germany rebuilt, democracy restored, and the old regime swept away. But the truth is far more complicated and far more deliberate. Beneath the surface, a web of hidden fortunes, silent influence, and carefully rewritten narratives endured. Consider this. Some of the wealth that fueled modern German industry never left the hands of the families who had navigated wartime contracts. Instead, it was quietly reinvested, diversified, and shielded through multiple layers of corporate restructuring. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy that historians often overlook. Even the companies we think we know, BMW, Volkswagen, Hugo Boss, are only part of the story. The people behind them maintained control not just of factories and brands, but of perception itself. Philanthropy, public-facing corporate initiatives, and carefully managed media coverage became tools to obscure their origins, transforming shadowed histories into narratives of innovation, tradition, and national pride. Little-known fact, in the 1950s and 60s, many industrial families quietly acquired stakes in emerging sectors like banking, energy, and communications, industries that would define post-war European power. By spreading influence quietly across multiple pillars of society, they created an untouchable network that textbooks rarely acknowledge. And it wasn't just about survival. It was about continuity and control. Decisions made in quiet boardrooms, far from public scrutiny, determined the direction of economies, infrastructure, and even politics. What seemed like ordinary business growth was often the careful orchestration of generational influence. This was shocking enough, but what came after was even more unbelievable. The way these families embedded their legacies into modern Germany ensured that the wealth and power amassed in wartime didn't just survive, it thrived, silently guiding industries and shaping society in ways most of us will never see. And that leads us to the final chapter, the conclusion of this hidden story, where past and present collide, and the true scale of influence becomes impossible to ignore. The story of Germany's old money is not just a tale of wealth. It's a story of foresight, strategy, and survival. From wartime factories to modern boardrooms, the families who navigated chaos quietly shaped industries, politics, and society itself. Their fortunes were not mere accidents of history. They were engineered, protected, and transformed over decades into empires that continue to exert influence today. BMW, Volkswagen, Hugo Boss. They are more than brands. They are symbols of resilience, cunning, and the hidden structures that underlie the economic power of a nation. What seems familiar on the surface often conceals decades of deliberate strategy, silent maneuvering, and influence that textbooks barely hint at. And yet, perhaps the most remarkable part is not the money, the companies, or even the influence, but the fact that these dynasties turned history itself into a tool. They preserved legacies, curated public perception, and ensured that power, once gained in wartime shadows, could be wielded quietly, invisibly, across generations. As we look at the Germany of today, its economy, its innovation, its global presence, we are also looking at the echoes of choices made decades ago, decisions that transformed turmoil into enduring power. The story of hidden wealth, carefully nurtured and fiercely protected, reminds us that history is rarely what it seems, and that the forces shaping our world often remain just out of sight.